Okay, there we go. We're now recording, and that I'll load the link tomorrow. So let's get on our way. Hi Warren, you talking? Hearing you there. Hearing Anthony
Hi
either.
Chris, how are you this evening? Hi Chris, how are you this evening?
Ah, there we go. Now I can hear you all. Yeah, good, thanks Anthony. How are you doing? So you've been uploading a lot.
I was going to have a conversation.
Looks like you've done
with
a lot
you at the end
today.
of the session actually, just to see how you're going with all that.
I'll give you a good idea tomorrow. I've looked at some of them. It's looking really good. Yeah, you've done some good stuff there. It's good that, well, you've done projects before. You can see you running with a project, so it's all coming in nicely there.
Yeah, the only thing I was a bit concerned about, I couldn't get RPLs from my current employer because I'm not a project manager with my current employer. So that's why I thought I'd just do the courses from scratch.
So that's why you're doing it. I wondered why, because it looked like you could actually quite easily have done it. Okay, were you a project manager before?
Majority of site manager and part project manager on construction sites up to about 20 million.
Okay. Okay. That makes, because your answers are good, the what you're providing as evidence is great. So I think you're going to get through this part quite easily. Yeah, anyway, I'll give you some feedback tomorrow. I'm going to be doing most of that tomorrow. Hopefully I'll get through all of it. But you certainly have loaded up quite a bit already. So yeah, well done. All right. Okay, let's get going. Tonight we're going to do human resources. And we're going to look at some tools and techniques on that. The last one took me a bit longer than I thought, so I'm going to rush some parts of this. And if there are any questions, they have already asked me to extend some of these tools and techniques for next week. So next week's question and answer time, I will be looking at some of the other ones that I didn't cover. But there's not that much time. All right, so let's go on. Tonight we're doing human resources. Remember the A team? What makes a high performance team? It's the skills that the team brings together, the enthusiasm, tenacity, the idea of common purpose and goals, the interdependence, good communications. So that's what really makes a good team. And one thing is a project manager, and you need to protect your team so that members can do their work. Now, these are all things that are good. There are some differences though between what makes a project management team slightly different to perhaps what a conventional team is. Would be is that conventional teams are normally permanent membership. Their team leader may have an authority to reward and discipline, which project managers sometimes don't have, especially in a functional organization. They may involve a single discipline, where often in projects it's multidisciplinary. In conventional teams, usually the deadlines, but they don't have regular schedules to meet, whereas on projects, and especially construction projects, there's always that critical path that you've got to watch and put stress on the whole team. Normally members in conventional teams are cross-trained in multiple areas, and from a project manager's perspective, normally the project team members are all specialists and are not often cross-trained across the whole and are not necessarily multidisciplinary. But those are just things that normally happen, so there's some differences in project teams. From a team building perspective, it's important to have people committed to a project team. Sorry, I don't know what that address WIFM comes from. It must have just popped in there. Somebody else asked me, where did that come from? What does it mean? I'm sorry, it's just in there by mistake. I don't know where it comes from. There is the frequency of interaction. All members must buy into the team's goals. You need to keep competition within the team to a minimum. It's not bad to have competition, but it's not good to have a lot of competition and conflict within a team. So you need to keep that in reward. You need to see ways of rewarding your team. Rewarding doesn't necessarily have to have financial reward. It can also be recognition. I was mentioning to the other guys earlier that I had to do a technology project, was implement a new administrative system for a higher education organization at China University of Technology. It had impacted just about the whole institution from a staff perspective, and it wasn't always easy to give rewards out, but recognition played a big part in keeping people motivated to do that, recognizing when they've gone out of their way, recognizing when people have actually put in more than what they probably was intended to. Often when you're doing a dual system and you're taking one over the other one, it means a lot more extra work, and recognizing that is often quite good. We did get some reward to some people. Certainly they got paid overtime if they worked overtime, but it often meant more than just that. Communication is very important, especially having a two-way communication, and we need to deal with that communication, both formal and informal. And we need to deal with the goals, and roles and responsibilities are probably the most important defining factor in that. Now, roles and responsibility matrix is probably a critical thing to start off with, and we're going to look at some of those things. Responsibilities, relationships are important. Right, so those are some of the things that we need to look at from a team building perspective. Now, those are the things that sort of apply right across the board with human resource planning, our human resources in management. But there are four processes that I want to deal with, and the process groups that they really are in are planning and monitoring and control. So we need to look at those two. We're going to spend a lot of our time tonight actually in the develop project team. So that's where a lot of techniques really come into play. And we're going to look at the evolution of a project team. So just to look at some of those techniques. Right, so HR planning is the process or the plan which the resources are needed and how to train them to ensure that they stay motivated. The acquiring is that negotiation. If you have functional managers, that's where you're going to do your negotiation up front, and you negotiate with functional managers. We'll come to that one a little bit later. Develop a project team is to ensure that team is motivated up front and as quickly as possible to be and well managed. And then obviously managing that project really means resolving those problems that come up. So we'll look at some of those things as we go through this evening. Now, if we look at HR planning, it really takes those environmental factors into consideration, the project management plan, the organizational. What you really want to come out with here is that work breakdown structure, well-staffed, knowing where they're going, and that role and responsibility matrix. That's probably the most important thing that you're going to work. If everybody's clear on that, normally you don't have a problem. If that's not clear, then that's where conflict arises. Who's responsible for this? Where does it end? Where's the other one? It's this passing of information and work that can be quite critical in those things. So passing of information is where a project manager must look, either information or work or something. Where it comes from one person to the other, that's where the issues really come in. Now, the tools and techniques is obviously your organograms and your organizational charts. There's a lot of organizational theory that comes into play here. I'll talk about some of them, not in detail. I really want to concentrate on some of the techniques that you can use. The other one is networking. Networking is really that interfacing that you have with multiple people, and it's a negotiating power. Well, it's a negotiating game. It's a game of where you give and you get. So it's a game of give and take. that idea of being able to network within your organization to get the most out of people. So those are the tools and techniques you're going to do even in your planning. So there's not much that I want to talk about there. It will be a little later, but I want to try and get over this part so we can spend a little bit more time on the other ones. In the next one, you're going to see that the organogram charts are really in the techniques, tools and techniques, and in the outputs. Well, that's true because you're going to be using it, but it becomes a tool to use in the following ones as well. So your role and responsibility is a tool itself, but it's also an output. So that is the case. Just needed to put that there. Right, now acquiring the project team, area that is quite critical in a functional organization. All right, you're going to put your staffing, your roles and responsibilities in there, but you should be able to come out with your assignments and your resource availability and updated staff management plan. Now, if you're in a matrix, so if you're in a project organization, or you're in an organization that's a functional organization, this is the time that you actually negotiate with your functional managers. Now, some of the issues are leave. What do you do with leave? In a functional organization, what you'll find is the project manager is often left high and dry because the team member doesn't, or somebody in the team just doesn't tell him he's going on leave. The next day he comes and he schedules something and that person's on leave. These are responsibilities that you need to take up and get a mandate signed from your functional managers. So if you're working in a functional organization for this one, what you need to do is go to the line managers, if you've got a member of their staff on your project team, and sign a mandate with them. Say, these are the things that we actually need for it to work effectively for them and for you. Remember, that person is probably going to take on a bigger workload, and they don't look to you if there's a problem. So if someone is going to go on leave or sick or something like that, you don't even get notified as a project manager. Obviously, that doesn't work well for a team, but that just often happens because the organization is structured that way. It goes to the functional manager, and they just expected you to know. So those are things you need to negotiate with those functional managers, and you need to come up really with a mandate. That's how I got around it. It was actually I went to all of them. All the line managers, project that I talked about at TUT had 32 people on the team, and I actually negotiated with 32 line managers to make sure that all the people that were on those ones actually knew some of the ground rules for doing it. We're going to talk about ground rules a little bit later. So get that worked, not so much with your staff members, but with line managers if you're in a functional organization. A matrix organization, it's a little easier because you have more control, you have more authority, and it makes it easier to actually work with. Now let's go on a little bit more. So the tools that you have here are negotiation. Virtual teams is in the PM book, but even today I don't see too many virtual teams. Virtual team means actually people that actually don't physically work together. They actually are apart from there. They might provide input some way telematically, in other words, from a distance. It is a way to get some jobs done, but it's not always easy to do that. It could work very, very well in IT situations, but that's the only place that I really know that it would work. Then you get this pre-assignment. The idea is to go up front. That's what I was talking about now, that you go up front and you negotiate with line managers and you work out a mandate and work out times that are actually going to be when you do have that, when you do have some sort of control over that. And what do you do if things need to be done? What do you do if something's not been performed, if the performance is not up to scratch? How do you organize extra development time with the person, coaching time or something like that? So those things need to be all negotiated with the line function, and the best place to do it is to do it up front, your pre-assignment. Then obviously the developing is the next one that actually comes out of this one. And this is where I have got some techniques to share with you. Some of the techniques that will come up here are general management skills. training, team building activities, ground rules, co-location, and recognition awards. Now, there are two that are not in here that I would like to share with you. Some of them are in your book, the Stephen Hartley book. If you go in there, and it's about page 250. Really what you're going to be looking is chapter 9. So chapter 9 of your textbook really gives some really good things about different parts of this human resources management. And some of the things I've taken out of here, some of them so that you can refer back to it, but I'm going to recommend highly that you actually look at it, especially teams and their personalities, which I never covered. We will be covering teams and their evolution, managing conflict, which I can go over a little bit, but not too much. So there are some things here that the power portfolio is important in the textbook. Just have a look at some of those things. Motivation and performance are quite important. Organizational structures. So there's I know we did that in the integration, but I would re-look at those ones. So here, there's quite a few nice techniques in your textbook. So I suggest that looking for that is to go to that. There is one question about power, which I'm not covering too much tonight, but is in your assessment. So I'm just saying that is there because power, stakeholders, and teams all very important. So one of those questions is there. Now, while we talk that, there are some theories that come into play with this one, and I'm not going to go into it. I'm sure you've heard about Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. It's obvious is view that the highest performing person is one that's self-actuated, morality and a creativity and a spontaneity, and solve problems and lack of prejudice, acceptance of facts. And that's all built upon esteem, love and belonging, safety and psychology and physiology. All those things are taken care of. If those things are taken care of, you'll probably have a very motivated person in your team. That's Maslow's theory. There is the Hertzberg's hygiene theory, where the job is right in the middle. What motivates people is really growth, achievement, responsibility, and recognition. That really motivates things. Then the hygiene things are the physical needs, the social, the status, the orientation, security, and economic. You need to provide those for a basis. That's all Hertzberg is saying. And that has a lot of validity in it. A lot of organizations are actually working towards those hygiene needs and the motivation needs now a lot more. On your project team, you could take some of those things into consideration. That's about all I'm going to spend on those theories. There is the X and Y theory. I don't know whether it's used very much, but there are some questions on that one. If you're going to do the PMI questions and certification, they will ask you about McGregor's theory, X and Y. I'm not on the assessment part of it. I don't think I've got anything really on the X and Y theory. There's other people that have added to it. You can look at that. I'm not going to spend much more time on that one. Right, this is really important because this helps you predict. And there's two of them that I'm going to show you. The change cycle, which is important when you things that bring about change. It affects people and people react a particular way. And if you've got these predictors, it actually helps them. So what we're looking at here is teams and the evolution. What you really want to get to is that performing part. And I see there's a spelling mistake on that one. It's supposed to be morning, or joining is what Tucker originally had. You understand Tucker's technique for and what happens with teams and their evolution. What we're going to look at is this in a little bit of detail. There's a theory about situational leadership that says that depending on the maturity of the team is going to depend what kind of a style of leadership you have. Whether you're going to have an autocratic style or a participative style or a delegating style. Now obviously on the one end is autocratic, the other side is delegating. Now that's got a lot to do with where your team is at. All right, so we're going to look at that. These sort of things come into play when you're looking at the team and its evolution. So this is a good predictor. So let's have a look at what happens in the forming stage. In the forming stage, it's often important that the project manager or leader needs to establish the team. So this is the time when you spend time on the tasks and the vision and the objectives and the clarity and defining even a team charter. Now, a team charter is about how you're going to work with each other. What are the ethics and ground rules, if you like, for working with each other? For example, that team members don't go and talk about the team in a derogatory way outside of the team. You should be discussing things about each other within the team. So if there's conflict within the team, keep it within the team. Don't take it across the whole organization. Things like that. Show respect for one another would be another thing. These are values and ethics that should be discussed up front and in the forming part of it. Now this is when obviously people have to, in the first part, there's a lot of fear in here because you're going to be exposed to different things and new things. So your team, there is some sort of fear that's going on in the forming part of it, and it's good for you to take a very directive approach or even close to an autocratic approach when you're in the forming stage of the team. Okay, and what you need to do is keep in mind a lot of the things about the task. Now, they will evolve into the storming part. The storming part is often because conflict sort of comes up next in any new team when they're testing each other. They don't know each other, and there's often a lack of trust. You need to develop that trust, and what happens is that tempers get a bit get out of hand. And in the storming part, often you're not in the performing part at all. This is where you need to start building and working and smoothing conflict and building those good relationships. The anger stems from the original fear that they might have had when you were forming the team, but now people are becoming more assertive and they're saying, hey, we don't like this or we don't like that, and they start becoming a lot more assertive in it, and doing that, friction often arises. So that's a time when where the project manager needs to take some of these things a little bit into hand, and really help those that are less secure in the team. All right, you need to put on a very positive view. You need to show that things are going to change, that the team is going to work together well, so that you can get them into the performing part of it, or the norming part of it. Actually, norming part is when they start settling down, they start seeing the goals, and you can actually start backing off a little bit. All right, so the performing and norming, the idea that people understand why the conflict's occurring, understanding that things will be better. That's your job, is to make sure that they can see that these things are going to get better. You need to consider about assertiveness and conflict resolution, which I'm going to show you some of those techniques right at the end tonight, and learn some of these skills and when to use them. So that's quite important. The other thing is in the norming, when you can start stepping back a little bit, you can start being more participative. But this is a good time to actually arrange a social with your team. If you want to build your team, this is a good time to do it. They're starting to get to know each other. The fear is gone. They're probably a little bit unstable still. And what they're doing in the team at the moment is that you'll find that they'll be asking questions. How can I make this better? How can I start making these things work together? It's got to take place. I've got to make this thing work together. This is the time that it actually takes place in the evolution of this, of the team. You're going to see when I come to the change and the conflict, it almost has exactly the same cycle, by the way, when I show you the change cycle, which is another tool that you can actually use. But from a human perspective, it always starts with a fear, it goes to a type of anger, and then it goes to an exploring. The norming part is normally the exploring before they become a performing part of those things and integrate into the team as a whole. The final part is the morning part, or the adjoining part, because that's the project. Let me just do the performing part. This is the part that you can actually start doing and delegating, and the team will start working on its own things. It's a time where you need to be a lot more balanced, if you like, and I'm going to talk about that now when we get into some of we look at actually how can I perform better as a leader. So you only need a light touch. your situation has changed slightly, so what you'll be doing is delegating a lot more and allowing the team to have a lot more freedom in their work. So performing is a good part. The adjourning, this is a time when you should be having a breakup, a wake, if you like. But this is a time to celebrate what you've actually, your achievements. Remember, you're probably going to work with a lot of these people again. And this is a good time to remember the very positive experiences that you had even during the project and the learning and the growing together as a project team. So it's a good time at the end of a project to actually have that social time together and actually reflect on a lot of the positive experiences that you actually had. So don't leave that part out, because this links into your next project or links into something else that you're going to be doing in the future. So don't leave it out. So there's the whole evolution. I think the key points that you need to remember here, teams are formed because they achieve far more than the individual members. Now this reminds me of the NASA game. The NASA game came out of the Apollo 13. Remember, the Apollo 13 was was the one that went to the moon and didn't land because there was a problem. They hit something hit into the side of it, and the NASA game came about because of that, where all sorts of things were used to get them back to Earth. But the whole team worked together, and putting all these things together was a synergistic approach, which means really 1 + 1 = 3. So that's the key point about the team and the evolution, is that you can actually get to the point in a performing team, and especially a high-performing team, where you really have a good synergy and where you can have a lot of fun. Okay, so it's to do that. Effective team leaders can actually accelerate that process, and you need to get over those first two parts, the forming and the norming, or the forming to the norming, and really get into the performing. And some of the other two techniques that we're going to look at tonight will actually help you do that. All right, so that is that. We're looking at the project team. To motivate is that recognition and rewards again, the ground rules, team building activities, training and co-location. Co-location is where you actually have a place for the team, where the team actually works together, and that actually provides a lot of synergy in itself, the communication with the team building within itself. So if you can co-locate and actually have the team working in a location of its own, it's actually quite good. The reason why I'm saying that is often in functional organizations that doesn't take place. On the management side, you need to be a coach, a facilitator, and you've got to remember the soft skills and the ground rules. This is where power comes into play. I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm not going to talk a lot about power tonight. I have been asked to talk about it in the question and answer session next week. So if you want to hear some more about this in the question and answer thing at 7 o'clock next week, I'll be talking about power and a few other things. So let's go on this one. I don't know, Anthony or Warren, if you've actually ever heard of action-centered leadership. It's a theory that was put out by John Adair, and what he's actually saying is that you need to balance the task, the team, and the individual. John Adair really was a post-war expert and made a huge impact in the UK. He went to Sandhurst and was and purported the theory that leaders aren't just great men, that leaders can be trained, and leaders need to look at these three actions in balance. So actually what you need to do is concentrate in the intersection of these ones. In other words, you shouldn't overlook at the task and overlook at the individual and overlook at the team. He would say that you become unbalanced and the team doesn't perform very well then. So what you need to do is keep these three in balance. Okay, I suggest you can go on the internet and have a look at some of the things that he's done. There are some very good things there. It gives you an idea. It's not a complex issue. He has 8 skills that you can actually try and introduce for yourself, and he has a lot of motivation as well. He believes in 50-50 motivation. little bit like Pareto's 80-20, but he believes that motivation really comes 50% internal and 50% external, and he gives you some really good advice on how to motivate teams. All right, so his whole thing is about keeping the team, the individual, and the task balanced. You need to focus on all three of those if you're a leader. So that's action-centered leadership, or what it probably used to be called as functional leadership. All right, let's look at some of how you would go about it. What are the techniques that he would use? The task is about achieving the goal. The team is about developing and building your team. So you need to focus on that. So it's effectively, and it's even more effective. And the individual is helping individuals develop to their full potential in the workplace. The reason why I'm giving this one is that I'm very familiar with it, and I've used it when I was training leaders, both adult leaders and boy leaders in the Boy Scouts in our past. We ran a team, patrol leader training unit, ran a team, and we used to run 2 courses, 11-day courses on twice a year. And I've actually seen putting this in practice. It's simple, it's easy for people to understand, and I've seen actually leaders grow enormously by balancing these things out. So let's have a look at some of them. When you're looking at a task, you need to, these are all things that you're actually doing. What he's actually saying is that you need to keep these in balance though. Obviously, focusing on the task means identifying the purpose of the group, constantly communicating that with the group. The other one is clearly state the final goal and constantly reiterate the goal all the way through. Now you can see, if we're looking at that other one from Tucker about the forming, norming, and storming, we'll see that this also plays a big role in it, making sure that everyone understands the full content of the resources. So in other words, your team needs to have, you can't just give them pieces, you need to give them the whole picture. In other words, they need to see your project plan, they need to see how you're going to put your resources, they need to see those processes that you're using. Don't hide one from the other. You need to give the whole team a perspective on that. So the whole team needs to see the task and clearly understand it. When you establish deadlines for your project tasks, explain the quality standards as well that you're expecting. So you need to focus on the task. These are the things about focusing on the task. Now what happens with a project manager is you're so busy doing other things that you actually sometimes forget to do some of the other things that are in here. So you might focus a lot on the individuals. You might focus a lot on the group. You might leave the task. However, now let me just say this. The most neglected area is often the group. Often leaders look at this predominantly, and they look at individuals. For some reason, if there's a problem, they'll go to individuals. If there's a problem with a task, they keep looking just at the task. And these things here that we're talking about, the task, they often leave out the things of the group. Okay, and these are some of the things that you need to look at from the group. You need to identify the style of the group that you'll be working, whether it's a formal or relaxed or how it is, and you need to keep that style within the group. In other words, don't make significant changes in the way that you actually work with a group. Identify a style in the group and then keep with that style. Don't mix it up, because that causes insecurity within the group. Make sure that everyone in the group has the skills. Now you see how these overlap with each other. Has the skills and the training to accomplish the final goal. Don't set someone up in the group, because it doesn't just affect that person, it affects the whole group. If there is somebody not performing in a group, the whole group is affected. If your team will be working in smaller groups, make sure that there is a predominant leader. And if there isn't, give someone the authority to lead that group. Because if they're not leading, they're going to look at each other. I'm going to tell you a little story now, as soon as I've done these ones, so that you understand what I'm trying to say about the group and about leaders in those groups. Make sure that they are effective and properly trained. So if there's sub-leaders and subgroups and sub-things that you're responsible for, make sure that that leader is properly trained as well. Monitor the group relations. Resolve conflicts where necessary. Yes, it's the leader's responsibility to look at those ones. That's why I'm giving you the way to use conflict resolution. It's actually Kilman's technique, and we'll look at that one a little bit later on. The other one is to work on keeping the group motivated and the morale high. Now that is the part that most project managers fail. They don't keep the group working together as a group. So this is the most neglected area of the 3 circles. So the group's performance is important. Now let's just look at the individual quickly for it. Normally, this and the task are the 2 areas that are not normally neglected. Okay. However, there are project managers that do not spend one-on-one time with their project team members. This is actually quite critical, because you can identify their strengths, their weaknesses, their needs, and any skills that they actually need to come, which will not come out of a project meeting, which will not come out of a group discussion or brainstorming sessions. You need to spend time one-on-one with each member of that group, and it needs to be on a fairly regular basis. Right? That's often neglected as a project manager. The second one is to make sure that each group member's skills are there to be able to perform. Don't set somebody up to fail, because it's going to affect everybody and it's going to affect the task. Praise and reward as an individual is really, really important, and it should be done in front of the team members. And you should promote where they have been a contribution to the group. So recognition here is very important, and remember, it doesn't have to necessarily be, recognition is not necessarily financial or that type of thing. It can be praise, it can be something that acknowledges the work that they've actually done. You need to help define each person's role within that group. We've talked about roles and responsibilities. This is a critical part of balancing it with the individual. And team members lagging behind need to be coached and to be put back on track. You need to be there helping them coach and put them back on track. Now, those are the 3. That's 3 areas that a leader should be focusing on. I highly recommend that you go onto the internet and actually get some of these things from there, or even get the book from John Adair. It actually is a very simple book, and it's easy to read, and it's easy to implement. Now, what are the key points? The first key point that I want to bring out here is this, about this technique, is that leaders have many responsibilities when it comes to managing your team. And it's easy to get focused on one area. So it's easy to get focused on the task. It's easy to get focused on the individual. And it's easy to get unbalanced with the other 2. Okay, and what it'll lead to is an unbalanced or poorly functioning group. So what I'm saying is those 3 areas need to always be kept in balance. Using a tool like Action Center Leadership can actually help the leader stay on top of the most important responsibilities. And when you're on top of it, it doesn't take a lot of effort. When it gets out of balance, then it takes a lot of effort to get it back. And you will have an efficient, happily working team that's productive. All right, that's the actual point about Action Center Leadership or functional leadership. There are a lot of other tools. Like I said, there was situational leadership, then there's a whole lot of other ones that actually come to place. But this one is fairly simple to use. Now, motivating people in different ways. As a manager, it's important to remember that you should use motivational techniques to influence not only your subordinates, but also your colleagues and managers senior to you. All right, so how do you do that? Well, for senior members, always show them the benefit. What you need to try and get them, it's a negotiation. What you need, and that's what mandating is all about, project initiation documents. Those senior stakeholders and client need to see the benefit of what you're going to be doing. And that's what motivates them. That's what motivates them to give you the backing that you need. All right? It must suit their purposes. And colleagues, how do you motivate colleagues? Well, this is the networking area of it. Remember, we talked a little bit about networking. What motivates colleagues is often, it's one hand washes the other. It's a networking one where when you're offering something, they're prepared to give a lot more back. Okay, so it's a very important part of that one. And often colleagues can actually help each other tremendously because they just give to each other and help each other. So It's about helping and supporting you and helping and supporting them. So when you're offering others, you're going to get that coming back to you. So it's normally that's a way to motivate colleagues is by offering services and accepting the services of their services. Motivating subordinates means to give that recognition. Okay. What they need to see is that when they follow you, that it's going to bring them satisfaction. So following you will bring them satisfaction. And at this point, I want to just relate a little story to you. I told you that I was on the leadership team, and what we used to do with the boys ranging from about 14 to 18 years old, we used to take them into a very unfamiliar area. We used to give them a cartographic map, normally about a 1 in 50,000, where there's contour lines on them, and we say, okay, you need to get to this position. You need to find where you are. We normally give them a compass, and we normally take this group. They've probably never met each other, and what we really want to do is observe who the leader is. Now, I'm going to show you some things that actually come out every single time we've done this. What we do is not only do we give this group together, but we put 2 observers with them. They normally take notes about everything. Because they're boys, we normally have a boy, another boy observer, and we have an adult observer, and they're not allowed to speak, and they're not allowed to talk, they're not allowed to give any kind of instruction. Even if they're going off in the wrong direction or heading to the wrong place, they're not supposed to give anything. The only thing they're supposed to do is make sure that they are safe. So if they're going to do something stupid like jump off a cliff, obviously the adult and the observer is there to actually make sure that they don't do that. But otherwise, they're not allowed to do anything but observe and make notes. Now, what actually happens is when a group like that's put together, invariably, the biggest person in the group is the leader. For some reason, always the biggest person in the group becomes the leader immediately, and everybody looks to them to actually do the right thing. Now, what happens is the biggest person is probably not the most outspoken person, and normally he fails very quickly because he can't give direction. Remember, we talked about forming, storming, and norming. And in the forming part, if you're not directive and you're not giving some sort of guidance or taking the energy that's going to be there and putting some synergy to it and taking charge of it, it's not going to happen. Now, what happens is that the biggest mouth in the group is the next one that comes. The problem with the biggest mouth in the group is that normally that person has already pre-assumed a lot of things and hasn't listened to what the group is saying. All right, so he's the second leader to fail normally in the group. So the first person to fail is normally the biggest person, and that poor chap is going to have a tough time right throughout the whole course because they will never see him as the leader again. The biggest mouth is also going to have the biggest problem because every time he opens his mouth, they're going to say, well, you couldn't tell us how to get there in the first place. So it's very important when things like this happen is to actually observe and to understand your group before you actually open your mouth. And then to actually channel the energy that takes place. Remember, I said in forming the group, it's very important for you to be quite directive and to give the guidance, make the goals clear, understand where you're going. So you need to understand those things and put them clearly together. So I can tell you from experience, that's actually what takes place. Now, what motivates people on that one and motivates the rest of the team is this whole idea that if you're going to follow you, you're actually going to get to that end point. So, I can remember one of my ex-bosses saying, a leader is someone you want to follow. All right, and that's the issue here, this motivation. Running a little bit out of time, so I'm going to rush off a little bit more. One of the other things that are very important in project management is this. That often projects are disruptive. Right? When you're going to put in a project, you're going to disrupt the normal running of the business, or you're going to disrupt the normal running of something somewhere. If you're putting through a new road, or you're building, it's Anthony that builds pathways in Noosa, you're going to disrupt people. Right? So, one of the things that I implemented in one of my projects was using this change cycle. It actually came through some friends of mine, and they actually helped me implement this, and I really got to understand this change cycle and the technology that comes behind the change cycle. what Lily, Brock, and Anne Salerno actually discovered was that there are 6 stages in a cycle of change. And remember, change starts. And on the one side, you're very comfortable, you're integrated, you're satisfied, you're focused, you're really going on, your behavior is a generous thing. Then change comes. Now, the things that happen in change here is the first stage is that there is, you feel that sense of loss. Hey, suddenly something is not the same anymore. And there will be feelings of fear, and the thoughts are cautious. But the problem is nobody wants to do anything. Now we're going to look at the first 3 of these in some detail. The other 3 you can actually, you'll have to look up on the internet or look up somewhere or get the book. But it really does help, this one. The second one is actually the feelings of resentment. That's because there's doubt. Their thoughts are often skeptical and their behavior is very resistant. Now, if you don't have this resistance, if you don't have some kind of resistance when you're implementing a project, then there's something wrong. And you need to stimulate that something that's wrong. In other words, provoke the things that are there, because people are just keeping quiet. What you need to do is move people from a loss and a doubt state to a discomfort state where, sure, they have feelings of anxiety, sure, they have confused thoughts at the moment, and they might be unproductive. But if you can get them to the discomfort site or zone, comfort part of it, then actually you can get them to start thinking. Because the step to the next part in discovery, or they get a feeling of anticipation, they become more resourceful, and they become energized. Now, do you see how this fits in with the forming and storming or norming of putting a team together? So these are 2 different people. Or there's Tucker that does the evolution of the team, and there's Brock and Solano that actually look at the change cycle. If you look at the loss, it's the forming part of your team. If you look at the doubt part, it's your storming part. If you look at your norming part, it's really the discomfort and the discovery part. So those 2 put together. And then your high performing is actually the green part, your understanding and your integration. So you see how this actually fits in quite well. And using these techniques, we can do it. So I'm going to look at quickly. I'm quickly going to take you just through the first 4 stages. Let's just talk about it. If you look at the early stage, people often cope with change is to deny that it's actually happening. Right? And you're going to look at even conflict management. If something's trivial and you can get away with it, deny that it's actually even there. Right? And that's one of the points that people do, and that's exactly what they do. So some of the common responses that you actually see of this one is, oh, I've heard this happen before. Remember last year they announced a new customers initiative and nothing ever happened, nothing will come to pass. Oh, this is just another harebrained idea from the top. I bet this will be like everything else. The head honchos will be gung-ho, but in 6 months' time everybody will have forgotten and back to normal. You'll see. So there's a denial that something's actually going to take place. I'll believe it when I see it. All right? Now, when we see these things, then we know that they're in a denial stage. And what you need to do is kickstart it and give them some fear. All right, so being directive might actually give them some fear. The only problem with the fear is, as you'll see in the next slide, that the problem with the denial stage is it's difficult because people are inactive. They don't do anything. They're not going to do anything when it's inactive. Right? So you need to kickstart them, do something, give them some sort of assurance that something will take place. Now that's how you can get them out of them. Tend to move the denial state if they see something solid, something tangible, some indicators that really are different that have actually been put in place. So these indicators are important for people to remain. Otherwise, people are going to remain in the denial stage for a long time, and they're just going to be inactive. Right, so if we look at the anger stage, oops, actually a part missing here, I'll have to check what. All right, when we're looking at the anger and resistance, when people no longer can deny that there's something happening, then they get angry. They say, but how can you change this? So the type of things that they actually say here are things like, who do you think they are? They're jerking us around. Why do you think they're doing this? Why are they picking on us to do this? They just don't do things right. Why can't they do it at a different time? Why can't they do something different? How could you allow this to happen? Actually, people say far stronger things like tonight. Now, again, the same thing happens if you start giving people tangible things that actually are beneficial and they can actually see that benefits starting to arise, they will go into the next phase. Right? And the next phase is actually one of exploration and acceptance. Okay? There are still some things there we'll say, well, I guess we start having to make a difference, or maybe we can get through this thing, or maybe we need to just get on with the business. They can't deny it anymore, and they've got over the anger phase, and they got over this hump. They start to accept things, and they start to accept the stage. They become more open-minded about things as well. But be careful, because anger can come back here very quickly. Right? That's why that little triangle is there, because this is when fear and anger can come back very quickly. So they might be starting to explore, they might be starting to accept, but they can go back into the anger and the fear stage where they become paralyzed or resistant. What we really want to do is get them over to becoming much more open, which is the fourth stage, and that's the commitment stage. This is the payoff stage. This is when people are committed to the change, they're willing to work towards making it succeed, they know it's now a reality, and at this point people have adapted sufficiently to make it work. Remember, this is the performing stage in your team cycle as well. While some changes never get endorsement from employees, like downsizing, employees at this stage will commit to almost anything. Okay, so organizational effectiveness is really to get to people at this stage. Now, all these are predictors, and if you study a little bit more in those two areas, you'll actually see that both the action-centered leadership, the forming and norming of the team evolution, and this one are all will help you predict where people are at, and how do you move them from where they're at to where they should be, from an emotional intelligence, if you like, from an intellectual thinking part as well. So how do you move people from where they are to where they actually should be, from a behavior and from an attitude perspective? So that's the change cycle. The key points about this are that the change process takes a considerable amount of time to stabilize and to work. Don't underestimate some of these things. Okay, and don't allow it to work itself out. It won't work itself out. You've got to actively do something about it. So if you're not getting reasonable resistance, you have a problem. So if there's no resistance, then you need to worry, because then people are building it up underneath, and that will explode. That's like a volcano that's been capped, and it's just waiting to explode. Right? So if you're not getting resistance, then there's a problem. All people like to resist change. So you look out for that. In managing the project team, there's two things that you need to take into consideration. Really, it's those things about power. Okay, managing power. Where does this power come from? And I'm going to leave you, except I'm going to do it next time in the question and answers. But the power one, what we really need to look at is this conflict management. So I'll use Thomas and Kilman a model to try and understand. Now, if you're the project manager on this one and you want to have to succeed in various ways of conflict, right? Thomas Kilman said that there's a model, and he has two axes: cooperation and assertiveness. Now, it doesn't say aggressiveness. It's not aggressiveness. It's how assertive do you have to be. So if you want to be assertive, you need to do things. You're either going to be competing or you're going to be collaborating. If you don't want to be assertive, then you're going to be avoiding or you're going to be accommodating. Now, if we look at the if you want to cooperate and you want to get some, so on low cooperation, you're either going to be competing or you're going to be avoiding. But if you're going to give high cooperation, you're either going to be collaborating or you're going to accommodate someone. Okay? Let's look at those four areas. Okay. In the beginning in the team, you should be competing. Right? You should go in there saying you know you're right. And you should actually demonstrate to that team that you know you're right, because you need them to follow. So you need to be quite directive. Right? You need to communicate that failure is not an option. So that's high assertiveness, and you're not cooperating with anybody else. You're being a little bit dictatorial here, right? You often need to make quick and decisive actions at this stage, right? So if you want something done, and you want it, and you have to be highly assertive, and you have to have low cooperation. So the techniques of doing this is, it's often when unpopular decisions are made, and you need to show you need to show your authority, and you need to show that you have got that authority to do this. Leading one. However, if you want to build a team, a long-term relationship, then you need to be a lot more collaborative, collaborate a lot more. And that means that you need to have high assertiveness and high cooperation. If you want a team that's enduring and want that commitment, you're going to have to be, your solution is going to have to be governed by others as well. So sometime in that forming part or the norming part, you have to allow and allow them to have their say if you want that enduring commitment. And that means you need to consolidate different perspectives. You need to see that the optimal outcome is there with everybody, but you're not going to sacrifice yours. In other words, you as the leader, you still need to be there. So you've got a high assertive, but you're also going to cooperate a lot. But you do need sometimes to be accommodating. That's when you know that the other person's evidence is a little more compelling than yours. But the most important thing is that you need peace, goodwill, and harmony to be not to be disrupted. And to do that, you need to create a tactical advantage by offering a concession. So that's accommodating, especially when your own argument is pretty weak. Okay, and it's got the chance of avoiding and damaging the relationship, so that you can't build that team again. You're avoiding someone that's low assertive, but it's also low cooperative. It's something that's minor and trivial and shouldn't worry about it. Equitable balance of power, or there's confrontation that may result in damage and resolution. So this often in this case you cannot win. You try and avoid the issue completely. Now there is a compromising position on all of these. That's when it's right in the center. That's why that circle's in the center. This circle over here is actually it's not high assertive, it's not low assertive, it's not low cooperation. It's about medium on everything. Okay, so this is the moderate one. But that's when the outcomes are moderately important, and that there's no other option that's working. So you need to move towards an option. So this is where you require a gesture that actually moves you forward. But when there's no clear thing that's coming out of something, then you need to be compromising on this, just so that you can move forward. Right. Those are the that's the Kilmer model for handling conflict. I hope that's actually helped you this evening. Are there any questions? Oh, I talked a lot this evening. I'm sorry I didn't give you much chance. But the floor's open now, so if there's anything I can help you with. No questions. Okay. Did it help you tonight? Was this evening session helpful? Warren? I can see you talking, Warren, but it's not coming through too clearly. Okay, if that's it, then I'm going to say goodnight to you all. Thanks very much. Right then, thanks a lot, and we will see you next week. Especially Anthony, Warren, I haven't seen your things yet, but I will be looking at all the assessments tomorrow. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.